That first night I slept beneath the open sky. It was a cold night, rain tumbling down on me intermittently. I lay on a moth-eaten, sodden wool blanket that still carried the acrid fumes of charred wood. Unable to properly hunt for myself, I drifted into an intermittent sleep punctuated by cold shivers and pangs of hunger from my empty stomach. Uneven ground of my back, the misshapen lumps of my gathered tools wrapped in a thin canvas rucksack the only support for my head, a misbegotten, pathetic wretch alone and unwanted in the sweeping grassland that lay to the southeast of the village I had never called home. It was, without a doubt, the most glorious night of my life. Never before had I felt so infinitely at peace. The hunger, the seemingly endless rain showers, the uneven ground that caused the muscles of my back to cramp so terribly I struggled to rise the following day. All of them were reminders not of how lost I had become. No, I was aimless. I had no inkling of where any other living souls might reside. But I was not lost. I was free. I woke perhaps an hour after dawn, wet, cold, shaking and sore. My throat was burning and my stomach grumbling. I knew what I needed to do, what was required, as it were, but I had no idea how to go about it. I was hungry and, more importantly, thirsty. The latter I could deal with, to a degree. I just needed water. But the former left me completely at a loss, so I lay there for a time, mulling over the possibilities. I was not devoid of intellect, but without the correct context I was floundering in the dark, hoping to find even the edge of an idea. Eventually the discomfort grew too much and I had to move. I rose, packed away my meager collection of worldly possessions and started walking. It was aimless still, but no longer without purpose. The most sensible idea I could grasp in my youthful inexperience was for fruit. That, at least, was a foodstuff I had some experience with, having picked apples both during my time alone and as a prescribed part of my daily routine. My parents were farmhands who attended an orchard for the same noble who I had angered, and they had taken me with them for a time, until they too had become too distrustful of me to tolerate my company. I could have returned, perhaps should have returned, to the village one last time, scavenged for what food had survived and set out again. But I was stubborn, and sensible enough to know that the journey back would take just as long as I had walked the day before. I was in no mood to spend a whole extra day to returning to where I had began, so I started walking towards the trees I had spied the day before. The same location I had arbitrarily chosen as my destination to begin with, but now I had purpose, new purpose. It was still several hours' walk, but it gave me something to focus on, so I latched onto it like a lifeline. It seemed a good idea at the time, but it was not to be. As I approached the tree line, distantly at first, I spied other people, but tired, cold, and hungry as I was, I thought nothing of them. Perhaps I assumed they were travelers or hunters, and in a sense, I was correct. They were both traveling and hunting, but their prey was not game, as it would have been for me. By the time I realized the severity of the danger I had blindly stumbled upon, it was far too late. Even were I fed and warmed from a night by the fire, I would still fare no better. If anything, the desperation I felt aided me in the short, ugly altercation that followed. I had never been one for violence, though many had tried to provoke me, and due to the distrust of my peers, I had never been afforded the basic experience with a sword that most boy children learn from their fathers. I was easy prey, but I was determined I would not go down quietly. 5 I counted, in all, though I am certain there were more that I simply did not see. One of them, a rugged, oddly sympathetic ranger, approached first, speaking some meaningless words of assurance to assuage the trepidation I should rightly have felt. In my weariness, I registered them only as sound and gave no reply. Instinct, or something, taking over long before my mind caught up with what was to come next. Oddly, in later years, he and I would become close friends. But that is a story for another time. In this tale, he was the instrument of my incarceration after only one night of freedom. Something I resented him for many years later, even after learning the true gravity of his own situation. Youth has a habit of doing that to people. Old wounds linger, rightly or not. As the first of them came for me, grasping me from behind with powerful, experienced adult hands, my far weaker, but far more supple body acted of its own volition. I swung the rucksack free from my back, bringing it up, over, and round in one motion. Putting every ounce of strength my underdeveloped musculature could muster, fueled by fear, desperation, and most importantly, frustration. I caught the man completely off guard, the dull metal tools contained within the canvas clacking and clattering violently as they connected with the poor man's face. I remember hearing him cry out so violently that only one contemporary came to mind. As a child, I had seen a friend struck in the face by a startled donkey. The boy's skull cracked like an overripe melon, leaving him bloodied and unconscious, and never quite the same again. They'd blamed that on me as well, of course, and I was never allowed to play with him again. The man, however, was older, larger, and tougher, but the blow I dealt him was strong enough, and lucky enough, that it knocked him to the ground just as effectively. Even as I felt the sack swinging heavily to the ground, propelled all the faster by gravity and momentum, I saw him recoil and clutch at his face, his nose, his cheekbone, his teeth, I knew not which, perhaps all of the above and more. He was bleeding more profusely than anything I had seen before. I took small comfort in that, knowing that, whatever came next, I had proven that I would not roll over and play dead. I would give them such trouble as they had never imagined possible. Ah, how arrogant I was. I was free. I was unstoppable. I could do anything. The folly of youth. How wrong I was. Though even now, looking back on it, I still feel that swell of pride. I had, after all, shown I had been underestimated. My next blow was far less successful. I swung again, overconfident and spurred on by my initial success, turning back towards the man, my friend, who had first approached me, decently puzzled that he made no move to back away, or even any obvious attempt to defend himself. But I was still hungry, too tired to care, and filled with the invulnerability of my victory. A moment later, when I found myself lay on my back, my body aching and his boot coming down towards my face, I had only an instant to process the instant before. Casting around for something, anything that would explain how this had happened, but I came up empty. Nothing I knew, nothing I could conceive, could explain how I had been so thoroughly and effortlessly cast aside, like a gnat swished by a horse's tail. Later, much later, I learned some of the techniques he had picked up in his travels. A veritable cornucopia of wrist and arm locks, grappling techniques, disarms, and, the most pertinent to that first meeting, body slams. Far from recoiling at my attack, he had stepped into it, taking the force of my much smaller frame against his chest. Wrapped one experienced arm around me and tossed me aside with all the effort of discarding a jerkin at night. It was a most ignominious of introductions, to be sure, but that single event led to one of the greatest friendships of my short life. It set me on the path to true freedom, and was, it transpires, the single act that sealed the pact which led to my death on the turn of my 25th birthday. He, Logan, my friend, one of my greatest allies, had had only an instant to decide. one heartbeat to make his choice and react. His first impulse had been to kill me there and be done with it. He had, in fact, been punished most violently for not doing so later. This band of flesh peddlers had a twisted code of honor that demanded any injury to one of them be immediately met with death. Painful death. But he had stayed his hand, for reasons he never could put into words. Though what came later was still painful, at least. At the time, all I could do was wonder, in sheer amazement, how he had bested me so effortlessly. But only for a moment. His heavy, booted heel slammed down into my face, and everything blossomed into pain. Though that, too, lasted only an instant, as I slipped into the merciful embrace of fevered unconsciousness. The funny thing is, that was actually the best night's sleep I ever had.